Everybody say hell yeah.
Now, what's up?
He's better than Oprah.
Come on, y'all. This is Shaun T, and it's time to trust and believe. Welcome to Trust and Believe. I'm your host, Shaun T, and today we're going to enhance your ability to trust and believe and being able to speak freely and be truly you. We are here with a friend of the show, Mr. Aaron Alexander. What's up?
Thanks so much we just completed a pretty hot, sultry, spicy, steamy conversation.
Yes, we did.
An hour and a half long conversation we went in. We taught women what they can learn from men in fellatio. I've gotten a lot from that experience.
All right, so I'm in Austin, Texas right now, which is one of my favorite places to come. I actually told my husband, I was like, if we ever buy a second home, I really want to buy one here just because I really love it down here. I think it's great. Anyway, with that said, before I met you in person and I interviewed you, I always looked at you as like a really cool person, and we had a really great connection when I interviewed you a couple years ago. And so when I saw him walk in the door, I said, damn, he is hot as
I received that.
And then I just said, you know what, Shaun, you are here to do a job.
I received that, Shaun T.
And for those of you out there who are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you would say that and you're married. My husband, we actually point out the hot people in the place. We're not one of those couples that's like, if you think somebody else is hot, or if you find someone else attractive, or if I catch you looking at somebody, like, it's over. We don't do that because we really like to embrace each other's,
I think it's a good way to maintain, we talked about that in the previous conversation as well, but maintaining passion and balance with intimacy. So intimacy is that part of like, okay, I can trust you with anything. I love you. We're like, we feel like this consilience with each other. And then what creates, I'm borrowing this from Esther Perel, Mating in Captivity specifically, but what creates that passion aspect of it is individuality. So the ability to be like, oh man, like I do have my own sexual desires and desires in general and wants and needs and all. Like I still am this entity, and I'm not just solely in this relationship. Like I'm 100% in this relationship, but I'm an individual in this relationship.
I just officiated a wedding, and one of the things that I said during my passage was, I do not like when people say, that's my better half. I'm like, because if you are operating on halves, then you are not reaching your full potential individually or as a couple.
Yeah, well, it's just codependence.
Right. And so I was like, no, that's another whole part of you. I just want people to like operate as a whole, and just to be able to, I think that's the way you can truly grow. And that's another way that you can accept when someone else is growing. Because if you're only living half of who you are because you're giving the other half to this other person, then when you see them, taking off like a hot air balloon full of like fire, and you're stuck down, you're going to be jealous and mad, and that's not necessary.
Yeah. Well, finding security in yourself, I think, is like a major foundation for most relationships. I'm still sorting that out myself, but full wholeness.
Are you in a relationship?
We literally are like in the process of, I think, breaking up right now. I still would like to be in the relationship. I also acknowledge that it's had its challenges. We differ and clash in enough ways that it makes things challenging. And so I'm kind of in process of navigating that right now. We had like a therapy thing last night. We're, maybe not for very long. We're in a transition phase right now. We'll see where that goes.
Is your partner like you, where they I feel like when I look at you and I talk to you, you look at life as a full experience. Whereas, if this isn't working, or like I'm really going to make sure I'm looking at the big picture before I make some crazy decision or get really mad about a decision that someone else is making, or do they look at this possible splitting apart as like this horrible thing, and like, you're a horrible person for wanting to do this?
She does a better job. So originally the main one of the main splits was what her deepest, and we're going to do a podcast on my podcast about this, so this isn't
With
like,
her?
yeah.
That's cool.
But one of her deepest wounds or traumas would be not being chosen all the way, particularly from a man, so her father, her brother, she's like had, past relationships, not being like the most important thing, not being like the jewel or being just absolutely all the way chosen. And so within that, I have historically had a tendency of commitment, like marriage level commitment is something has been kind of scary for me. It's been something that feels like it potentially threatens this, sensation of freedom. And so my tendency is to want to maintain like relationship diversity in some way, like flirtation or messages, or like I have, I think, fear around shutting down like all other connections with females, and that rubs her deepest wounds like the worst possible way. And so trust became a challenging aspect of our relationship, and it's a part of that. And the interesting thing, I think, is what if I'm in a container with a person or in a conversation, whatever it may be, where I feel like I feel safe to be able to express any parts, like attraction or just anything, shame, guilt, like whatever it may be, but particularly with like sexuality, then suddenly it reduces the magnetism to wanting to wander out, having wandering eyes and being like, oh, we should have threesomes, we should, all the things. When it feels like there's that freedom within the relationship, suddenly to me, I'm like, oh, it's not that interesting.
Yeah.
But when it feels like it's like, oh no, absolutely not. That is the worst possible thing that could happen. Like that's, game ender, game closer, like no chance. Then suddenly it becomes interesting.
Well, it sounds like you just don't like to be trapped in a box.
Our perception of an experience isn't necessarily absolutely true to the experience. But yeah, I can have that sensation of like feeling trapped.
That's very true when you say that, because my husband and I definitely have experiences. And we're like, oh, we should try this or we should do this. And then we're like, that didn't necessarily end up the way that I fantasized
Usually
about
when you
it.
do it, it's not that amazing.
Right.
Like, and I think there is something really beautiful about, for me, a primary partner or a monogamous partner, or someone that's like, it really is like you have that built up trust and emotional connection, and they're like, your wife or your husband or someone that you have that level of connection with. And typically in my experience, wandering away from that, it's more the idea of it that is really interesting, but the actual physical act is also can be pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think it's more the desire and the idea and the build up and the visualization and the fantasy. The actual thing oftentimes isn't as special as the build up was in my experience.
I just think our creative minds are much more powerful.
Oh yeah.
Than people might think. But I kind of want to continue to talk about this because a lot of people experience that. Especially if we can dive into relationships in general, because what it sounds like is you're very much like me. Like, I'm super flirtatious. I love interacting with people. I love the human experience. I love navigating different types of either messages, or I just kind of love navigating through different types of conversations and subjects and topics, because I believe it's where I learn best. Because I'm learning from someone else where at this moment we have something very much in common. But if I looked at the totality of their life, I'm probably going to be like, wow, this person is much different than I thought. But you do kind of get to, number one, find a way to connect with a person with something that's, that you guys kind of have in common. And then you get to learn about the things that you don't have in common. And I say all that to say, because when you do choose a partner, or like when I choose Scott, like we are complete opposites, but everything that is opposite of us, or everything that we have aligned together is amazing and powerful. But everything that we have that's opposite, we both love about
Yeah,
that
that's
other
beautiful.
person.
It maintains that polarity.
Right.
Which is really important.
And I just think that I have that. I found my person. I'm like, he's wonderful. We have zero secrets. And I know people are like, yes, you do. I literally have no secret with him. He knows everything. He has the password to my phone. He can go through. He actually checks my email. He checks my text messages. Like he knows what's in the hidden camera roll of my phone. You know, there's nothing. And I do believe that being able to communicate with other people in a way kind of enhances that like ability to have knowledge and really experience the world. So when
You also can find those new experiences within an individual because
sure.
an individual, like, I don't know myself all the way. You know, there's still layers of myself that I'm anticipating being unfolded through the process of life and relationship and all that. You know, so that also is very exciting. You know, the experience of meeting someone on the face and saying like, okay, like, wow, they're a baseball player. They, like vanilla ice cream. And they like to go running in the morning or whatever the thing is. You know, it's like, cool, that's one version of that person. You know, then there's you just keep on peeling the onion back. And I think that that's the magic of relationship. You know, it's the process to continue peeling and continue observing. Because I think upon initially meeting someone, unless you're like some transcendent, enlightened, master of some sort, then you'll probably be like seeing through the layers of people just in an instant. Have you been around anybody like that where it just feels like they see all the way through you?
I mean, I'm kind of like that.
Yeah, I can see that.
You know, and I hate saying that.
People that have been through shit typically have the capacity to see through those layers.
And I think that it's like really weird when I say something like, oh no, yeah, like I get it. And they're like, no, you don't. And I'm like, but I do. And so myself, and I just like to say that, there's only a few people that I connected with through social media specifically, where I'm able to have this conversation with them, and I'm like, no, I'm like so deep. And then there are times where people would come to my events, or they'll come to my transformation weekends or my retreats, and they walk in, and one of the first things they say to me, they're like, how did you know? Like, without even meeting me. And I'm like, I just know. So anyway, I say me because it's kind of a coming out thing. I'm like me. But there are some people who are like super deep like that, where I'm just like, oh my gosh, like you really, really, really know.
Yeah.
And I find it to be a really beautiful thing because I think it enhances. I think what it is people are aware, and I think a lot of times those people are not allowed to hear something that makes them uncomfortable or see something that makes them uncomfortable. Like I said on your show, I just love being uncomfortable. I love things that are just so, because my husband would always ask me, why do you like scary movies? Why do you like horror movies? I'm like, because I don't know what's going to happen. And the fear of the unknown is
It's
amazing.
probably also you like to feel.
Big time.
And that's like in a culture that's largely touch deprived. There's a book I'm reading right now. I was sitting on the floor here actually called Touch by a gal called Dr. Tiffany Field. And she is a researcher in Florida, and she conducts, she's like world-renowned research around touch and the effect on our physiology and health and emotions, all that. And one of the interesting studies that she's done was at a hospital in Florida with premature babies that were in incubators. And what they found was that the babies that would just have 2 sessions of 15 minutes of massage each day would grow 47% faster than the babies that didn't have that physical touch. And you see like children in Uganda or various different countries around the world, a part of their upbringing is, they're held until they're like 2 years old. They just, they're not on the ground essentially all that much because they're a part of their mom. And so they're riding, they're on the sling, and they're developing their sensory motor system and proprioception and emotional contact and pheromones, and their touch system is continually being developed, and it makes them feel safe, and it makes them feel loved, and it makes them feel supported, and it makes them feel like life is pouring through.
Yeah.
I can feel it. But a person that maybe is a little bit more deprived in that way, which particularly around the times of, the COVID epoch, and lockdowns and shutting down and, stay home, be a hero, like that's during that time frame, we're going to see a lot of really interesting effects of that, like we already are, but I think that people at a deep level yearn to feel, and the more that we can feel, generally speaking, if we're able to process it. If we're not able to process it, then it becomes, as opposed to a eustress, it becomes, more of like a distress or a trauma. But the more that we can, our cup can contain and we can hold and feel, it's like a healing force. And so I think a person in that situation, because I'm very similar in that way. I just want to feel, make it cold, make it hot, make it heavy, make it whatever the thing is. And I think a part of that is a deep yearning just to feel, I think.
Speaking of that, this might be a really hard subject switch, but
yes, I think I already started the hard subject switch. So
with your 7 inches.
Yeah, with this 7.2 measure every morning.
It's an inside joke, ladies and gentlemen. Go listen to this podcast where I was the guest, and you'll understand what we're talking about. You asked me questions on your podcast about, the gay relationships versus heterosexual relationships, and we talked about sex and intimacy and like being able to really embrace your sexual feeling. And one of the things that was really profound, what we talked about, is just how people are really afraid to talk about sex and talk about these things. Do you identify as a heterosexual male?
I mean, you mentioned on my podcast as well, like labels are funny, but I'm attracted. If you laid out 1,000 men and 1,000 women, I would analyze the potential of having sex with, pretty much every woman, and that wouldn't happen with men.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of cultural influence. So growing up with the belief system of like, oh, what does that mean if you were attracted to a guy, or if you did have some type of sexually intimate experience with a guy, like what there's so much deep baggage of shame in at least American culture in most schools.
For sure.
And it's even worse in most other cultures, really, I would say. What cultures is homosexuality celebrated?
The gay culture. It's not celebrated anywhere.
I mean that's like parts of San Francisco and like metropolitan cities, but it's still it's isolated to like minority groups.
It's isolated to LGBTQIA+. It's isolated to us, which is kind of weird because there are a lot of people out there who don't celebrate it or don't accept that as a part of culture, or because of religion, or because they're suppressing it, that they still don't want to recognize it.
I mean, it's common all throughout nature, so that's the interesting thing. And there's so many parts of ourselves that, we're ashamed of, and they're completely biologically consistent with like as quote unquote like normal as one could be. If you look at it from the lens of like
and there's
what
no
happens,
such thing as normal.
But some percentage of animals in nature, for the most part, there will be instances of homosexuality,
right.
And it's like it's fine. It's just whatever. It's just a thing.
Well, they're not analyzed. Have you had an experience with a male sexually?
Well, that I have because I told you before. But yes,
but I wanna.
I gotta.
I ain't want to just. I didn't want to be that person that's like, well, you've had an experience.
Yeah, I got a BJ. I got a BJ from a fella that was conducting some type of like shamanic healing on my nuts.
Of course, it had to be really part of another kind of experience.
Yeah. I was in LA, rubbing me up.
Doing
some spiritual stuff.
Was it interesting? Like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, a lot of shame, a lot of like, oh, and like, okay, I'm intrigued by new experiences, and I just want to understand. And so within that was kind of the thing I've questioned, I've talked about, on my podcasts and different places and just with friends and whatnot, of how does a person delineate and define what is my authentic truth compared to what has been just habituated upon me from parents and church and culture and, all of those things. And I think it's a weird, sticky conversation to actually get into like what is really true for me, like the essence of me, my biology and all those parts. And we talked about, again, on the other side of, or the other podcast around, like Spartans and various different cultures where it's like to have sex with a guy and be like the top, for example, would be like an indication of being an alpha, like superiority, all that stuff. And so in that culture, it's like the complete diametrical opposite scenario where it's like, no, you're the man because of that. Then you jump 2,000 years, and 5,000 miles or whatever over later. And it's like, oh, no, if you do that, it's the worst thing, a lifetime of shame. So it's like, what are these belief systems and stories and, all of that? It's just, so parsing that apart, I find really interesting. And so that was a part of my being open to like, he asked if he was like, can I, give you a BJ? And I'm like, yeah. I think there was like a mechanical stimulation. And then also I think a part of the ability to actually get hard during it, probably a part of it is like the anxiety and like all these different parts that are built up. And that's, I think, how people develop fetishes as well. It's like, whoa, this is spicy in here.
Well, I wasn't going to ask. I was going to say it, but I like that, in the gay world, you're not just going to, like, I don't want people to be like, oh, Shaun told the world that Aaron got a blowjob from a guy.
No, it's fine.
But I think that, like, one of the reasons why I did want to authentically ask that question is because you were talking about, how, like, people who like to feel, and it's not just physical touch. It's, feeling energy, feeling emotion, feeling, just feeling all kinds of different things like that. And so for me, I am an emotionally driven person. And I understand that there kind of needs to be a balance of logic, so your emotions don't fully take over. But I feel like I use my emotions in a positive way to feel people, and I use my emotions mostly to help people and to be able to respect people, and because that's just really, really important to me. Because my husband Scott and I, when we first got together, he didn't understand why I was so emotional, and he would be like, I don't know if he said you're too emotional, but he was like, there's emotional and there's logical, and I know there's other people that's like, even his dad, who is an amazing author, and he talks about emotion commotion, like when your emotions cause a commotion. And I would always just kind of get really pissed at that, because I feel like a lot of times people suppress their emotions so that they don't have to experience an emotion, like crying. A lot of guys, if they like will hold in the cry just so they don't look weak, and I'm just like, but it's one of the most amazing
and one of the strongest one of the highest indicators of strength is a strong, strong in the sense they pick heavy shit up, fight, wrestle, do hard things, that's also willing to be openly vulnerable. That's like, oh boy, like that's like real true strength.
Yeah, because it's like the dichotomy of that, right? It's like, I'm being this way, but I also have this feeling as well. Like, and I can also release that and express that. Why do you think a lot of people don't like to express it?
That's a great question. I think there's been a bit of a mix-up of the idea of undesirable, uncomfortable, more just uncomfortable emotions being perhaps like an indication of weakness, or also maybe an indication of being like, I'm a buzzkill, I'm pulling the vibe down, I'm like, oh, I don't want to be that guy, but the reality is oftentimes the person that's willing to be that guy or willing to be that girl, it creates the invitation for other people to actually tap into deeper aspects of themselves. So again, it's very courageous to use the same language that you used in my podcast before. We were kind of having a similar vein of conversation, similar but different. So I think that is a part of it. And what's interesting with that, among lots of things, is if you look at an animal in culture, like Robert Sapolsky wrote an interesting book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And a part of that analogy / literal experience, a zebra, if they escape the mouth of a lion, or whatever, then they will go to a shady place afterwards, and they'll go through this convulsive, like, shake it out, like, not very beautiful. I mean, I would find it beautiful. You would find it beautiful. Like, it's actually incredibly beautiful. They're healing themselves, and
if they escape, this is real, huh?
oh yeah,
I've
yeah.
never heard of that.
Well, you've had the experience where you're having like a cathartic experience where you're like, you're trembling, you're shaking.
Yeah.
It's almost like your body is literally, imagine you have water on your hands and you want to get it off. You might like flip it off, but instead of that being water on your epidermis, it's, hormones, cortisol and epinephrine and all of those parts surging through your circulatory system. And so that experience of being able to actually maybe dance or be able to have an emotional release. And, I've done Rolfing, structural integration, bodywork, manual therapy, kind of like a blend of physical therapy and touch therapy or manual therapy for a while. And in that, people have all sorts of different ways to have these quote unquote releases. Sometimes people will yawn a lot. Sometimes people will just weep. Sometimes people will laugh and just be laughing for 5 minutes. And all of that, in our culture, we find certain expressions to be socially acceptable and fine. So I say to clients, I don't think I say this in I don't think I talk about this too much. But laughter oftentimes is a close cousin to sadness. Or shame or like deep hurt. And so this is the joker. On the face, on the outside, superficially, you have this deep emotive pent-up sensation. And it could come out as rage. It could come out as sadness. Rage would indicate maybe power. It's a suggestion like you have control, but really you hurt. You're in pain. You feel unloved. You feel scared. You feel left out. You feel any of that. And instead of being with that sensation, you instead express, flip the table over. I'm in control.
Yeah.
That is a hurt boy or girl. And it's so beautiful. It really is.
If you're not the recipient.
but
I know what you
there's
mean.
the availability. Yeah. If they're being dangerous and they need to be tended to in whatever way makes them not be dangerous anymore, but to themselves or other people. But to be an individual, to have that awareness that, oh, this person that's expressing rage, expressing anger, expressing whatever it may be, it's like, okay, like I actually can have compassion for this. I don't need to invite you into my life. I don't need to like receive your abuse, but I don't need to just say like, oh, that guy, he's an asshole. It's like, no, he's a hurt little boy or a hurt little girl. But what I was saying with that is the laughter part is something that we accept as being like, oh, he's fine. He's just laughing it off. Yeah. And so with bodywork and such or massage, you can touch certain parts of the body and it might be like ticklish. I'm not saying like rubbing a feather on your armpit, but like leaning deep pressure into somewhere, your psoas or whatever it may be. And then person might be like, ha ha ha, ha, like, oh, that's, I'm just ticklish there. But then shortly after you get through that ticklishness, oftentimes it will turn into like, oh no, it's actually really painful.
Right.
Oh, it's actually been pent up for whoever, God knows how long. And then oftentimes with that as well, there could be other forms of emotive releases on like the other side of that. But the face is laughter because that's what culture accepts as being like, oh, okay, he's fine.
There's one thing that I want to do, and I do want to get certified in like massage or body work.
Oh, it'd be such a good idea.
I think the problem is, I'm like, who am I going to work on? Like, it would be hard for me to put on a website like, I'm a massage therapist. And
no, you don't need to work on anybody.
But I want to practice.
Yeah, practice.
I think it's amazing.
It'd be so beautiful if massage is supportive. And by massage, I just mean touch, particularly like the flavor of touch being one coming from the lens of care and compassion and support. And like, I care about you. Causes babies in an incubator to double their growth rate. Same food, same everything. Because it sends the indication that, oh, wow, I'm loved. I'm safe. I'm a part of the tribe. It reduces blood pressure. It's supportive for cognitive function. It's supportive for like every aspect of your health and well-being. Touch through, compassionate, loving, supportive touch, it makes everything work better.
Yeah.
You know, and when a person, the worst thing you could do to a person is put them in solitary confinement. You know, which I'm actually doing a darkness retreat in like 2 weeks. So I'm volunteering to put myself into essentially solitary confinement, but in the dark for 5 days, which probably isn't that big of a deal.
But just alone.
Yeah.
And food? Are you doing it?
Yeah. So they have like a double panel whatever situation where they can they bring you one thing of food each day, and then they like shovel it through.
Okay, why are you doing? I think it's amazing, but there are a lot of people that's gonna be like, "Why are you doing this?"
I think the reason that I'm doing it is, I think I like new things. Why did I get a blowjob from a shaman?
And not a Shaun.
I actually became less gay curious after that. I would recommend it. Anybody that's like, you know, I mean, most men in Western culture probably at some point have had like a gay dream or, you know, something along those lines, and they wake up and they're like, oh, what was that? You know, so I think that having the experience, you know, I'm here for it. And then afterwards, you're like, cool, like I did it. It's not just this like.
But was it like did you have an orgasm?
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
Pretty quickly.
Your ability to speak through that so freely is really incredible. I really want to commend you on that, because there are not a lot of people who, one, would say that they even had that, two, that would talk about they even possibly had a dream.
Oh yeah. Would
analyze it to the point of like, I became less gay curious after that.
Yeah.
Because one of the questions I was going to save for later, but I just have to ask it now, like, why are you the way that you are?
Because that I'm so curious.
No. Like, and I'm glad you asked that, because maybe you don't understand what other people see. I mean, like, you're a really special person. And so, like, your brain is just like, it's very free. It's kind of like what you were saying about just kind of you in the relationship, and like, you know.
I think maybe I appreciate you saying that. That's like really sweet. Come from you especially. But probably if I were having to dissect what would be some like pivotal turns to cause that to happen, probably would just be perhaps one, being around like hurt people growing up, having a pretty interesting family dynamic. My dad got very addicted to crack, cocaine. Not that I need to specify which version of crack. And he ended up going to jail when I was like 16 or 17 or so. And he was, you know, in a very, as close to being dead as a person possibly could be. Like I would be rehearsing his, whatever version of his death would be every day while I was at school, like a lot, like at least a lot. I don't know. Very regularly, just going through the different iterations, almost as like an exposure therapy kind of thing, because I knew it was going to happen.
And like waiting and trying to see how you would cope with it.
Yeah, trying to like pre-cope.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably interesting. Now he's doing like really amazing and well, and he's like a close friend, and
that's fantastic.
Very rare. I'm really like incredibly grateful that he got to a point where he was able to go to jail, become unaddicted to crack, and he had all sorts of other, you know, stuff going on as well, but that was like the main one. And to come out, no money, not really able to, like, before he was like a successful stockbroker, he was a falconer. We'd go and like hunt small game with falcons and shit, to becoming a dying crackhead, smoking crack inside the shed, where the hawks used to be. Like, very interesting life path. And then being around the dynamic with my mom, and, my brother left at that point because he was like 4 years older than me. So that would probably be an interesting thing. So just developing compassion, I think, for people, and traveling. I moved to Hawaii when I was 18. And then I traveled every winter, and I won't talk too much more about this because eventually it'll probably get boring, but every winter I would travel I'd buy a one-way ticket, or I did it, to another country someplace, and I would liquidate all my shit, whatever shit I had.
Yeah.
And just like move to a typically warm climate where people speak a different language. And I would just be out there and go to different countries for like 6 months. One year I did when I was like 22, I bought a motorcycle and rode through Mexico and Central America. The plan was to go to Patagonia. Ended up getting an injury and ended up like circling back the other side and winding up in Texas and Colorado eventually. But it was like a 12,000 miles in 7 months trip. And so just the reason I'm sharing all that stuff, one is to like bolster my ego, to prove you that I'm a really cool person. And then,
but I told him you were already. So.
All right, good, very good. But the other thing I think is that would add to that level of like acceptance is I don't really have a strong attachment to the idea of normal. And I think it's so important to be able to take yourself out of what is common to you, and that's a quote that I actually had in my journal while doing that motorcycle trip. I don't remember who it was, but somebody smarter than me will know what it is. But something along the lines of like the point of traveling is to be able to return to where you came from and truly know it for the first time. Whereas if you are just in that container, you don't know. So taking I think one of the greatest things a person can do for themselves is go out and just be other places.
That's like very synonymous with, even when I go back to my hometown, right? People who were there when I was born, that are still there, or, that I grew up with, that's never left. Like, their conversations have not changed.
Mm-mm.
Nothing has changed.
And there's something beautiful about that too.
It's something beautiful about it. There's something, and I'm glad you recognize that. I don't. But the reason why is maybe it's because where I'm from, because like when I come back to the same conversation and the same type of conversations, and then people look at me and they're like, "Oh, Mr. Hollywood, or this person thinks they're better."
Right.
I'm like, I don't think that I'm better, but I made myself better.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't comfortable for me to leave comfort, to leave normalcy. It wasn't comfortable. But now that I'm there, I'm like, there are plenty of people who stayed there that are doing really well and really happy and really great. I'm not saying everyone, but I just feel like traveling is just such an incredible can be an incredible part of your growth.
Being a human.
Yeah. I lived in Istanbul, Turkey. I lived in Switzerland. I lived in Germany. I lived in so many places that didn't speak the language. But I was going to ask you, of all of your travels, what is the the most profound lesson you've ever learned?
First, I haven't traveled like that much. I was in a phase of doing that for like 5 or 6 seasons or something like that.
Yeah, but do you live in your hometown? Like, where were you born?
No, I was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Amish country. Represent.
So, right there, was it Dorney Park or Hershey
Park?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm from.
done. I grew up in Philly.
Oh shit. That's
Philly
good.
and South Jersey. Come on.
Yeah, Lancaster's like an hour away.
I know.
Wow.
Maybe
all
that's
right,
why
that
we're
makes sense.
kinda
It's all adding up.
Exactly.
It's all adding up. I think probably greatest lesson that would be worthy of sharing. I don't know. Greatest lesson. I think probably that you're going to be all right. I think probably that the story so an example, when I was lots of different places, traveling through Asia or traveling through maybe like Mexico particularly, because Mexico is considered to be very dangerous, even like especially by other Mexicans.
Well, that's the first thing I thought about when you were like, I'm riding a motorbike. I'm like, excuse me?
So that's the thing. So that would probably be the biggest thing is people are, I think, 99% kind. And then within that, if I placed myself in some precarious situation where I'm buying a bag of cocaine outside of a strip club at 1 a.m. and I'm white and barely speak the language and I pull a wad of pesos out of my pocket, probably not the best situation, or at least increasing the statistical odds that there's going to be a problem.
Yeah, for sure.
But most places in general, when you get there, like the more dangerous the place, in my experience with traveling thus far, typically what I found is when a place is notorious for being dangerous, now there are situations where like missiles being dropped and whatnot, but those people will probably be even more gracious and supportive of you because they're like, what the hell are you doing here? Like, how can I protect you? How can I support you? Yeah. And so by going into those places where people are actually like, oh no, don't go to Juarez or, whatever, upon arriving there, what I found is the people were like even more kind because they were surprised that you're there, and they want to make like a good name for the place.
And they're concerned for you.
Yeah, they want to be supportive. And so suddenly I just had this experience actually where I got off a plane from somewhere, and there was a guy who was like kind of like Rain Man type individual, very like stupid smart. He was a British guy, and he was traveling all around the country, America, doing this big trip, and he's spending a bunch of money, and he's like 20 years old or something. And I'm on the plane with this person, and I'm like picking his brain. He was able to sit in complete utter stillness for the whole entire flight, and I'm like twisting and turning, doing all sorts of stuff. So eventually I was like, bro, like this is like some enlightened master that I'm sitting beside. And I think his name's Harry Boots or something on Instagram. I looked up his thing. But after that, I was like, I want to take care of this person. They're traveling, they're 20 years old, so I wanted, I'm like, how can I support? How can I help? So I ended up buying him his Uber thing to his place. It wasn't a big deal. It was $12 or something. But it was just like that inclination that I had to be like, wow, here's this guy, this young guy from across the world, all by himself. Like, whoa. Like, how do I enhance and lubricate and like support this person's experience, to like take care of them? That part in myself is everywhere. Wow. And so that, I think, probably if there's like one thing that that's worth sharing around traveling, would probably be that, I don't know what the exact perfect statistical odd would be, but like 99% of most cultures are super kind.
The fantasy in your mind is always better than the reality a lot of times. But you go to these places and you're like, oh my gosh, it's going to be that. Or it's just like people who suffer from anxiety. It's like, which is me. It's like, this is going to happen. This is the worst. But you get there.
Do you suffer from anxiety?
Yeah. Well.
Oh, interesting. What does that look like?
I'm much better now, for sure. It's horrible. It is.
When does it show up? What is it like? What's the experience?
My experience is like sickness. Like not now. I'm so much better. Like 3 years ago, like I was going to die every day of a different disease. Like it was terrible. It was so terrible. I felt like I was living in a cloud. I was just kind of like a zombie, like living and doing what I needed to do. But internally, like it's so hard to describe. It's like walking in clear quicksand. Like you just constantly feel like you're melting, like sinking. Yeah. But for some reason you're not, but you just don't feel whole.
Do you remember the earliest memory of you feeling that sensation?
I do. It was for some reason when my mom would leave me home. She would go out with her friends like on a weeknight, and I was home with the step monster. And I was just like, oh my gosh. Like I remember going to the window like every 5 seconds. When is she going to come home? Like, when is the car going to pull down the street? Like I could see where it looked like this huge street, and I go back home now and it's like the size of my phone, kind of, so small.
Isn't that weird when you go to your parents' house? Yes. It looks like it's like a model, like a miniature model.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I'm like watching every car and like hoping it's her. And it's not her. And then she says she's going to be home at 8 o'clock, and she's not at home at 8 o'clock. And I'm just like, because it was always my fear of is the sexual abuse going to happen at a different time? Because I was like comfortable when it happened in the middle of the night. Don't ask me why I was comfortable with it. But I'm like, oh my gosh, like, so that's when I felt like my anxiety kind of started.
That's very common. If you can anticipate something stressful, it becomes dramatically less stressful. Yeah. That's happened in during the time where the Nazis were doing their whole like blitzkrieg thing and they're dropping bombs and whatnot. When they were dropping them sporadically, then the cortisol and the anxiety and all of that, like just the reported anxiety of the people in the places, was very high. But when you knew they're coming, it's 2:00, they're going to be dropping some bombs, you just deal. It just becomes normal.
Because you can do something with that.
Yeah, you can start to like self-regulate and organize and build yourself up to the anticipation and expectation, and then it's as was expected, you know, and you're like, okay, cool, I can process. Like the human is so interesting in our capacity to be able to buffer like so much. But what becomes really challenging is when you don't have any floor beneath your feet. You know, you don't have something that you can lean on, even if it's abusive.
Yes.
I think.
So that was my earliest, and then. Yeah, then with so many, it felt like there was this like rapid fire people dying of cancer, you know, as when I was a kid, like either church folk or family members, or it's just like, you know, somebody passing away. So then I think it switched to like health anxiety. It just exacerbated it. And then it got 18 times, like I say 18 times worse, but when I had kids, it became even worse. Like it was terrible. Like when my kids were 2, because then it was just like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die of something. You know, I'm gonna like, if I had like one weird poop, like I had colon cancer. It was terrible. Sure. It was so bad. And then I just had to like, you know, through therapy, and then I just had to like, I remember my husband just kept saying, "What are the facts? What are the facts?" You know, and that would like really help me analyze the facts. I would be like scared to go to the doctor. It was bad.
Where do you feel that in your body when it happens? Like where is it in the body?
I feel it throughout my entire body. There is no one place. Like there isn't.
Does it have a sound, texture, taste, like feel? Like how would you describe it?
It's only a feeling. It's like the cocktail is like fear mixed with like when I'm taking an SAT, like, but I know all the answers, kind of taking an SAT, and I'm like, I can speed through this because I know what's going on, but it's also mixed with fear. It's so weird.
What are some actual objective felt adjectives for that sensation of fear? Does it feel strong? Does it feel big, expansive, dense, contracted,
no, it feels,
vibrating?
It feels like
pulsating.
It's like a subtle, that tingly feeling mixed with like, have you ever like sometimes if I take a gummy and it's like indica, whatever, it just feels like, I don't know if people out there who ever gotten high. I don't like smoking unless it's a volcano, but if I take a gummy, like I immediately get this super heavy feeling, and I feel like I'm like
a heavy blanket kind of thing.
Yeah, like I really feel like I'm like in, like for some reason, like I feel like 2 times my body weight. Like that's how it feels.
Like heavy.
So then when I have to, like, if I have to work, if I have to have a phone call, if I have to talk to somebody, I feel like I'm lifting so much heaviness.
What do you do when you have those experiences? Like, how do you engage with it or disassociate from it or avoid it or go deeper into it?
I play tennis. I dance. I have sex. And I do, like, some box breathing, which really helps. But really, it's just like, and I have not experienced this in a few years, so which I'm really happy about. But it would just take time.
Yeah,
like it would take some time.
I wonder if, like, sometimes in my experience / other people have more like clinical experience working with trauma and like somatic stuff, you know, somatic bodywork and this sort. Or therapy. I wonder, oftentimes I think that for me, I have a tendency of like wiggling around stuff. So I also I'll go to jujitsu, or I'll go hit a punching bag, or I'll go paddleboard, you know, or call somebody, play pickleball, or like, you know, want to have sex, like, get it out, you know. But I think that there also, or I feel that there also is the availability to say, here's this sensation, coming. I'm feeling my heart rate change. I'm feeling my breath start to go up into my shoulders. I'm feeling this heaviness in my body. I feel like whatever the sensation is. And I think there also is another interesting direction is to actually investigate. And say like, what?
But the investigation is the worst for me.
Yeah.
Like, I should not investigate.
What if you sat? What would happen? How would it be dangerous to like meditate in that
No.
circumstance?
No. So
that's what I mean
forgot
by
to tell you
investigate. I mean like okay, what if I just like sit down and breathe? I know that might not be possible for some people.
I will tell you, and that's one thing I really forgot. The Headspace app like saved my life.
Sure.
Because I didn't really meditate before that. I was just kind of like,
Yeah.
You know, when it would get really overwhelming, I would do the Headspace app and I would do like a 10-minute meditation. I would go outside because I love the stars. And I live in a great climate when it's not the summertime in Phoenix. And I would go outside for 10 minutes and I would meditate and I would come back in the house and Scott would be like, how do you feel? And I'm like, I feel amazing. And it was kind of like taking Tylenol. Like, it's like,
yeah,
it masked the feeling for 4 hours and it would like kind of creep back in.
Yeah.
But it really, really, meditation really helps. I have a group online called the Unity Community, and I would do I would do meditations for them like on Saturdays, and people would love it because. And the crazy thing is, like, I used to think 10 minutes of meditating was so long, but when I'm guiding the meditation, it happens so much faster because it's just like you really get to connect to the breathing and the thoughts and
the
whatever.
idea of meditation is so you ask like why I'm gonna go do the 5 days sitting alone
in a dark
room. In sitting with that, you have no choice but to be with what is. To use like Ram Dass talk. So whereas a person could run circles around themselves for their whole life, destroy their relationships, push people away, whatever, feel all sorts of ways of twisted and turned and whatnot. And like my skin never really fit because there's this deep underlying kind of anxiety it's in there. I don't know how to get to it. All I know is when it pops up, I go for a run and I weather the storm. And so that's a person that's maybe on like a higher end of the pendulum swing where it's like, oh no, this is really like, it's like a lot. But within that, I feel that there is also an option to be with it and say, okay, I'm not going to run away from it. I'm not going to go have sex with somebody or go jerk off or, any of that. I'm just going to be like, okay, like where is this in my body? Does it have a color? Does it have a smell? Does it have a density? Does it have a texture? Okay. What's behind that? Can I get down into like the smallest little atomic level of this thing?
Yeah.
It's like, like actually,
what is the nucleus of this?
Yes.
This thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in a scenario, I've also done Vipassana meditation, which is a cool experience where you just pretty much sit and meditate for 10 days. And it's like, they call it noble silence. You don't talk to anybody. You don't look at anybody. And
well, that would be tough for me.
Oh yeah. Yeah, man. I'm like a wiggler. You've seen me this whole time. I'm sitting in 45 different positions.
You want to know something funny? So like when I first, Scott and I, my husband and I are like so opposite. So we had to do like a long drive. One time I think we were driving from New York to LA or New York to Arizona. And he was like, I bet you can't be quiet for 5 minutes. And I was like, who the fuck can't be? I'm like, yes, I can. He was like, I bet you can't be quiet for 5 minutes. And I was like, I absolutely can be quiet for 5 minutes. I was like, I don't like talking that much, whatever. So he starts the timer and then I was like, but wait. And he's like, and I was like, okay. I was like, I just have questions like, can I cough? Like, can I do these things? He's like, yeah, it's just like, you can't talk for 5 minutes. It was the hardest 5 minutes of my life. So,
sure.
So when you say you're wiggling, and I get it.
Well, but so a lot of that can be, like I was talking before of it's funny to try to figure out what we were talking about in this podcast compared to mine, but we were talking here of laughter oftentimes being a disguise for sadness or like deeper hurt. within that, I think that also can be a thing where someone can maybe almost like compulsively rearrange things, or compulsively want to say something.
Right.
It's like, it's just a lot of stuff. I just gotta I have this energy. I gotta get it out. I gotta change it. I gotta feel like I'm in control. And so, and that's fine. And there's lots of ways to self-soothe, which is such a beautiful thing. And that's actually something interesting, going back to the touch conversation, and then I'll get back on the other track. But there was some other research that was not done by Tiffany Field, but I don't know who actually conducted this, but it was done with adolescents and even younger children. Researchers were observing the amount of touch that these kids would engage in McDonald's between Paris and Miami, and what they found is in Paris there was a lot more contact. It was just more normal than the kids in Miami, which I would imagine Miami actually is more contact than a lot of places in the country. So but what they found is that the kids that had more physical touch were much less aggressive in school, for one thing, which is interesting. And I think there's a part of like feeling a part of the tribe, feeling supported, feeling loved.
Yeah.
It's like, it chills you out a little bit, And then something else that was interesting was the kids that were in the Miami place or McDonald's, they would notice that they would self-soothe a lot more. So they would like touch themselves.
Oh.
Which is kind of an interesting thing of just like this, like, it's like physical stirring up the mechanoreceptors in our, this body thing. It does something to us to soothe. And I think there's also the potential availability to sit through the things and actually be with them, as opposed to, going out running, kind of like avoiding the situation, like, this sucks, like, go.
Yeah.
And there's also value in going and running and all of that. But just one of the practices that is, I think, less leveraged for me and probably a lot of people would be actually, instead of running it off, like, what if I sit and meditate through and see what is on the other side and actually face this thing, and running's great.
And you're going to do that in the dark.
Yeah.
So one time I was in Montreal and we went to a restaurant where all the servers were blind. And so you walk into the restaurant, you order your food, kind of like you would do at a bodega cafe. And then there's these like dark curtains, like these heavy, heavy, heavy curtains. And you walk through the curtain, and once you're in there, you can't see anything. You can't see your hand here. You can't see anything. Nothing. When I tell you nothing, you literally can't see anything. And eating like that was the wildest experience of my life, because you sit down, you don't know who's sitting behind you. You only get to know the people you went with. You don't know where they're sitting until you start talking to them and their voice comes over there. Yeah. But eating like that was the wildest experience, because not until that happened did I realize that when I see sweet potatoes, my taste buds start to happen, and I salivate, and then I'm just like, I can't wait. But I'm eating this food on this plate, and there's no expectation until it hits your tongue.
Wouldn't it be great to have a relationship like that, where you don't start to pre-filter all of the parts of themselves and the way that they're being or expressing or saying or any of that? And instead, like, because when you process that food, that information called food, without the visual system, it's probably in a lot of ways a much more authentic experience.
You just accept it.
Yeah,
you ordered it, like you ordered your new spouse.
Yeah.
In a way. Yeah. Like you chose them, but like, how do you not?
I did a podcast recently, considered the world's leading expert around particularly what's referred to as the biopsychosocial model. But he's considered the world's leading expert around particularly what's referred to as the biopsychosocial model of pain. Biology, psycho, mind, social, culture. model of pain. And in that, he conducted a particular study around how our perception affects our experience of pain. And one of the things that he did is he would take a cold rod and, had different subjects. He'd rub the cold rod on the people's arms. And then for one group, they would have a blue light being projected at the same time. And the other group, they would have a red light projected on their arm. And what they found was that what you would probably assume happened, cold rod that's red, they experience it as being like, wow, like, cold rod as blue, they're like, oh, it's a cold rod, whatever. It's not as surprising. It's like not so bad. And so that's an interesting thing of how we are doing very similar things within our daily life, where you're perceiving things as a way based off of a preconceived filter that may have manifested itself when you were, whatever abusive scenario in your life or traumatic, repressed, or whatever the thing may be. And it starts activating up all these signals, and then you start seeing what are actually hoses. You think that they're snakes, and the whole world is covered with these, snake-like hoses. But now all of a sudden your physiological expression is chronically stressed. It's like in that stress threat response. Yes. Eventually that translates to maybe disrupting a person's sleep, disrupting their hormone regulation. Now suddenly maybe it's chronic fatigue. Now that person, as opposed to going to the root of what the is augmenting my filter on the world, they're going into, okay, I need more caffeine, I need more testosterone, I need like more of all of this, treating this topical expression. But maybe there's also the availability to come back in and say, like, what is the deep internal mental, emotional aspect that maybe is starting to pull some of these physiological levers.
I think that's a good challenge I'm going to challenge Scott and I to do that. Like if we have a conversation or maybe
pulling a
not
snake.
Like an argument, but if we have a discussion where we feel ourselves like, kind of seeing the food before we taste it, like meaning, when someone starts to talk, you're already ready to comment before you even, because you know what they're going to say because you've seen the food before,
right.
You heard it before, but instead of salivating at your response, to just maybe be silent for 10 seconds after they say it to you so you can think about it first. I think that's a really great challenge for
if you look at your senses, that's what percentage of your senses are built for anything but listening. Your eyes gather information, your nose gathers information, your ears gather information, your skin gathers information. The only thing that projects information out is just this one thing, like your mouth hole. Like
why does it have to be a mouth hole?
Every other
why does it have to be a mouth hole?
Every other aspect of your selfhood is a receiving system. So for that, perhaps there may be some association to how to live, a more effective life. Say how many senses? What is that? 5 senses or something? Yeah. And then there's other senses too.
I think there's 5 senses,
eyes,
but
nose.
They call it the 6th sense because it's like the 8th wonder of the world.
Yeah. So your like output aspect, is pretty much whatever. Call it 20% max. And another interesting random thing, the vagus nerve, which is considered the vagus means like vagrant, wandering. It goes from the brain, wanders all the way, innervating, the diaphragm and parts of the heart and various different organs. So it's a big old honking nerve. 80% of the nerve pathways, it might even be 90% actually, 80 or 90%. It's either 8 or 9%. Let's just call it 80%. Of the nerve pathways are afferent, meaning that they are gathering information from your organs and sending that information up to the brain to process. And then there's 20% or maybe 10%, it's one of the two, I've mixed those up before, that is sending information efferently from the brain down to the organs to tell the organs to do shit. And so even from a lens of the lens of the nervous system, Like your body is a listener for itself. So if you're just, a loud motherfucker that's just always, out here distributing your thoughts and opinions and all that stuff, it would probably behoove that person's life or that person's efficacy in life to start to sit back a little bit more,
to be more of a receiver.
Yeah. And then that would probably translate to receiving more of like themselves.
Yeah.
Like, what's my body saying?
I mean, I usually ask people, what does trust and believe mean to them?
Oh,
but I
you
think
got a box question.
No, but I don't.
You're not
going to
do me like that, though.
I don't need it today. You want to know why?
Tell me.
Because I really, truly know that you work on yourself so much that the belief you have in what it is that you do is like, I think the fact that you love to learn and love to read and you are an information receiver, I think is the lesson for people out there to be like, let me go receive some information. We talked about being a feeler. That's receiving information. We talked about you receiving fellatio from a guy.
Gotta receive a little fellatio.
But you received information like, hey, is this something I'm interested in? You receiving information from, like kind of we talked about a little bit with your relationship. It's like amazing. So you're a receiver. So I just tell people out there, like, in order to trust and believe in who you are, be more of a receiver than a loudmouth.
That works for me.
It works for me too.
Yeah, but it's nice and it's good having, the balance between if somebody is a receiver and someone is like the projector, like that still works.
I know. I'm the projector in my relationship. I was talking to myself.
Yeah. No, I know.
But I do listen way more now as an adult. As a
you would have had to be where you're at in the world. Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Where do we find you, Aaron?
I do the Gram. That's the Align podcast. I wrote a book. It's called The Align Method. There it is. Laird Hamilton's on the front there saying he thinks the Align Method makes sense. I appreciate that. And I think that's probably enough. I think most people probably just go to social media. Most of what we talked about in this conversation doesn't really relate to the things that I teach about. I teach about movement and how people's bodies can function way more effectively, spaciously, with less pain than probably they think. And so that's what I do predominantly on all the social media platforms, YouTubes and Instagram and all that. That's what the book is about. And we also have an online program that is a 6-week program that will be launching maybe late November, early December. There's a free trial. That's going to be rad. I won't go into all the details of what it is, but it'll be awesome. I'm really super excited about it. I'm as excited about that as I was about doing the book a couple years ago. So it's like that level of oh shit, this is cool. So yeah, the 6-week Align Method online program will be out late November or early December. And that's it. Align Podcast is the handle for all things.
Let's go. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, man. What a great time.